Wednesdays following the initial stream of each program of San Francisco Ballet's digital season. Before I introduce today's presenter, there's a bit of housekeeping. This event is streaming on Facebook and YouTube. We might have time for questions or comments at the end of the discussion. And as our presenter cannot see the questions or comments as they are posted on those platforms, we will have someone reviewing those comments and passing along questions that are relevant to the discussion in case there is time at the end. Today's presenter, Dr. Naima McCarthy-Brown, is San Francisco Ballet's 2021 Visiting Scholar. Each year, San Francisco Ballet invites an established scholar to participate in San Francisco Ballet's audience engagement programs during the repertory season. The goal of this program is to bring cutting-edge scholarship on ballet to San Francisco Ballet's audiences, students, and staff. And now about our presenter. Dr. Naima McCarthy-Brown is an assistant professor of community engagement through dance pedagogy at The Ohio State University. Naima has been an active performer, choreographer, and educator for the past 15 years. Originally from San Francisco, her love for dance developed at her community recreation center and later at the San Francisco School of the Arts High School. Her first book, Dance Pedagogy for a Diverse World, Culturally Relevant Teaching in Research, Theory, and Practice, was released in 2017. The book was greatly informed by her teaching dance in the public schools, private studios, universities, and in the community. Dr. McCarthy-Brown's scholarship is interdisciplinary and always relates to heightened understanding of cultural diversity. She has published works in the Journal of African American Studies, the Journal of Dance Education, and Arts Education Policy Review. Additionally, she regularly presents her research in the area of dance education and equity at national conferences. She has conducted research on the experiences of African American ballet dancers and is working on her second book about women of color in ballet. Welcome, Dr. McCarthy-Brown.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Getting a little feedback on my end. How's the volume now?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Cecilia. I really appreciate it. I'm going to just open up my screen so that I can share everybody. All right. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you some original research about women of the global majority in ballet. My forthcoming book is called Skin Colored Tights, and in the text, I am sharing oral history interviews with 10 women of color. Before I get started, I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. Just take a moment to reflect on the land and the labor that was stolen throughout our history in the United States that enables us to stand and sit where we are right now. I want you to feel free to take a moment, and you can write in the chat or in the questions on either of the platforms that you're watching on. Call out the indigenous nations to which the land you're standing or sitting on is. Today, I'm in Central Ohio, and I'm acknowledging the Miami, the Wyandot, Shawnee, and Ojibwe nations and their land and people who are the past, present, and future caretakers of the land. I want to honor the resiliency of these nations and recognize the historical context that has and continues to affect indigenous people and their lands to this day. I also want to acknowledge the labor of my ancestors, the African American community whose labor contributed to the vitality of where the United States is situated today in terms of economy. And I just want to sit for a moment and reflect on those things that I'm grateful for in terms of acknowledging the people, the land, and the values that have steeped our language, our movement histories, and our culture that we live and breathe today. As Cecilia talked about, I am a scholar, educator, and artist. I'm a native of San Francisco. I want to give a shout out to my high school as well as the University of Michigan, where I attained my Master's of Fine Arts, and Temple University, where I achieved my doctoral degree. This research that I'm going to share with you today could not be possible without the women who I interviewed and their graciousness and kindness in sharing their stories with me. Now, in the text that's forthcoming, I featured the stories of 10 women, but for time purposes, I'll be sharing the stories of Lauren Anderson, Caridad Martinez, Yanette Fernandez, and Shelby Colonna today. As you can imagine, I can't even share their whole story, but I'm going to take some themes and variations from their experiences and dig a little bit deeper into that information research. So why are we talking about women of the global majority in ballet? Why are particular bodies dominant in ballet? And why are particular bodies muted? I'd like you to think about that for a minute. And as we go through this time together, this lecture, you'll likely be able to draw parallels between ballet and other fields of study, other arts disciplines, other genres of dance, theater, music, business, education. The themes and variations of a lot of the things that I will talk about are not isolated to dance. In terms of voices being muted and voices being dominant, this is part of the American culture and history. And to be sure, there are marginalized voices in all communities throughout the world. And so to take a moment and kind of consider whose stories aren't being told and whose stories get to be centered. And that's one of the things that we're doing here today. It is with me also that we are in the midst of Black History Month, a time to lift up and celebrate the voices of African Americans who have contributed greatly to our country. I also want to lift up those whose work I stand on as a researcher. We'll talk a lot about dancers today, but there are dance scholars whose work that I rest on. And this work for me about women of the global majority started when I was a student at Temple University, where I got my PhD. And two previous students, also doctoral students, Melanie White Dixon, Dr. Dixon, and her work about Marion Sujet, a ballet pioneer in Philadelphia, excited me so. As a graduate student, it delighted me to learn about this African-American woman who could pass for white. And indeed she did. She passed for white to secure several dance studio locations in downtown Philadelphia. She had the first Black-owned business in downtown Philadelphia. It was a dance school. And she got her leases because she could pass for white. Later on in her kind of experience as a ballet teacher and a dance teacher of lots of genres, she went to the American Ballet School and registered several of her students to take dance classes there. And she registered them as a white woman. She left, she paid their fees, and then she sent them on to take classes there, knowing that they wouldn't turn them away once they'd already taken her money, but also knowing that if they had gone to register themselves, they would be turned away. This research that Dr. Dixon writes about in her book and her dissertation research about Marion Sujet was something that I was delving into as a graduate student, as well as Dr. Josely Deans, who was also a graduate student whose work was before mine, but after Melanie White Dixon, kind of situating between the two. And her work was centering on one of the students of Marion Sujet, Dolores Brown, who is still teaching ballet at Philadanco, which is kind of the hub of a lot of that research in that area where Black dance artists and many Black ballerinas were cultivated and nurtured in that time and space. As an educator, however, I wanted to create research that would serve my students. And as I was learning about African American women in ballet, and it was amazing for me to kind of dig deeper and learn about Janet Collins and Raven Wilkinson and Dolores Brown, I also had Latinx students, and I had Asian students, and I had students from all different parts of the world. And I wanted to see if I could expand the lens of my research to encompass more than just African American women, but women of the global majority, BIPOC women, women of color throughout. And so I extended the study to include the voices of Latina women as well as an Asian woman. Now, I was interested in addition to researching Native American women, but in the last two categories, I found it very difficult to collect data. I don't know a lot of Native American ballet dancers, and the Five Moons, who are Maria Tallchief, Marjorie Tallchief, Rosella Hightower, Moseline Larkin, and Yvonne Chateau. The Five Moons from Oklahoma were where I kind of start and ended. And Russell Tallchief is a nephew of the Tallchief sisters, and he has a forthcoming book within the next year that will kind of detail the history of those two women more. And there is a book about the five women, but women after those five that received a lot of acclaim and mainstream success, I don't have a lot of data on. I'm looking. So if you know of some, please let me know. And then when it came to Asian women in ballet, again, this was an area that I found a hard time kind of getting through to getting opportunities to interview. I found it easy and very accessible to reach out to African American ballet dancers for a couple of reasons. One, with Dance Theater of Harlem being in Harlem, New York, and being an institution since the late 1960s, there were a lot of African American women to pull from, and they had friends, and their friends had friends, and I knew some of them, and some had been my teachers. But with the Latinx community, the Asian community, and the Native American communities, they were a little bit harder to reach because there, one, is not as many of them. Two, with the Latinx population, there's language barriers. And I also found that with Latinx women and Asian women, a lot of times the ones that achieved wide mainstream success were not born here. So that ended up being a very interesting thread of my research in terms of the international lens and nature of the work, which I'm going to delve into a little bit deeper. But all that to say, I do not have a lot of interviews on Asian women or Native American women, and I'm still kind of open to adding a couple more in. And if there are resources that come to me, I'm very easy to find by way of Google, but I'm going to continue on for now. So in the research, I found some themes to emerge that I want to share with you. There was a theme around racial barriers in ballet that were a direct reflection of the race as a social construct within a given country. I say that because, as many of you know, race is a social construct, and the nature of a social construct is it operates differently in different societies. So I interviewed some ballet dancers in South Africa. One was a Cuban woman who was dancing in South Africa. One was a Brazilian woman dancing in South Africa. Three of my Latina dancers that I interviewed were from Cuba. One was a first generation Cuban American, but the other two had been born in Cuba and later came to the United States. So there was a big international thread there that is significant to the lives of these women. In the instance of South Africa, they were really trying to develop a diverse ballet company. And when I went on the internet and I would say, I just want to see what the company's image is. How are they representing themselves on screen and in print materials? What do their brochures look like? What is the look of the company? When I did that, I found that between New York City Ballet, Houston Ballet, Boston Ballet, and there are a lot of international ballet companies too, in Korea, in Johannesburg. The Johannesburg Dance Company on the face of the screen looked the most diverse. And so I thought, oh my gosh, there's a really integrated dance company in South Africa. But when I went down to Johannesburg to interview some of the dancers and talk to the executive director of the company, what I learned was, because of the history of inequality and apartheid, they didn't have a lot of trained South African dancers. They were bringing their dancers of color in from other places, which is why when I was in South Africa, the Black dancers that I interviewed, one was from Brazil and another one was from Cuba. So it was almost dancing for import, like we're importing these women to get more color in the representation of our dance company, which had pluses and minuses all around. However, I will say that the Johannesburg, the Joburg Ballet it has programming in several local townships in the country, and they're trying to create a pipeline into the country, and their plan is a 10-year plan to kind of cultivate more dancers, African-American dancers in their ballet companies. Similarly, when I visited Miami City Ballet and I worked with Lourdes Lopez, who's the director of Miami City Ballet, she talked about her program, which again, it's a 10-year vision because it takes 10 years to train a ballet dancer to diversify the company. And she's focused on an economical diversity, really reaching the needs of students of color from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Back to my themes emerging. So the racial barriers being particular to different countries, defining moments in a dancer's life. And I thought that Lauren Anderson's life had some really kind of poignant defining moments that I wanted to share with you. And they relate to in-group messaging, which I found to be a thread throughout the interviews, particularly in the African-American community and in the Latinx community. And then striving for the middle, which I find to be a theme not only with women of the global majority, but also a theme in the wider landscape of American mainstream culture and the dominant culture. So one of the things that comes up a lot in these circles that I work in academia is ballet being seen as racist, being seen as operating within a system of whiteness. And when I say whiteness, I don't mean referring to white people specifically. I'm talking about structural arrangements that privilege white people, right? And devalue the personhood of people outside the dominant culture. The structure of whiteness that I'm speaking of always presents itself in a veneer of neutrality, with compassion and niceness, right? That is actually part of the culture of whiteness, if you're within the academic context that I'm speaking. So ballet is not racist, people are, and systems are, structures are. To be sure, we have institutional racism, and that institutional racism lives in all of the structures within our society, and that includes our art institutions, right? But ballet as a form is not racist, and ballet is culturally relevant. And for some of you who might be familiar with my book, Culturally Relevant Teaching in Dance Pedagogy for a Diverse World, I talk all the time about cultural relevancy in all forms of dance, and this includes ballet. Ballet is international. The National Ballet School of Cuba, right? We have people in Cuba dancing ballet. We have people in Korea dancing ballet. We have people in Nigeria dancing ballet. So it's not about the form being racist or not racist or having whiteness. Racism exists where it is living in the culture and where it's activated as a social construct. So why should we care, and why is this interesting to everybody? How does it impact all of us, right? Those who are interested in equity cannot achieve equity without seeing it. We need to see representation in all aspects of our lives. And if we deny space to people of the global majority, there's no way to kind of suggest or claim that we have equity and equality. And the thing about ballet is, I talked to a group of ballet students last night, and I said to them, can anybody dance ballet? And it was a really interesting question. It brought up lots of discussion because, can anyone do ballet? You have to sit with that, because there is doing ballet in your community. There is doing ballet professionally. There is doing ballet physically, right? And physicality can pertain at times to ableism, able-bodied, or age at times, right? Too young, too old. But the idea of the exclusivity of ballet, and I extended the ideas to these students that I was talking to last night around gender, right? How inclusive is ballet to different genders? What about gender nonconforming people? How does ballet work in a context where you don't see gender as a binary? How does ballet work in a context where you don't see race as a binary, and where people are not stigmatized by race as an identity marker, right? And so those ideas, if we don't want to see ballet as a symbol of white supremacy, then we have to make sure that it doesn't look like a symbol of white supremacy. And we have to make sure that this art form that is enjoyed by people all over the world can be practiced by people all over the world also. I want to start with Lauren Anderson. And Lauren Anderson is a beautiful African-American ballet dancer, she's retired now. She danced with the Houston Ballet for many years. She was one of the first African-American women to be a principal ballet dancer. And she achieved that status in 1990. She had been dancing in the company since 1983. She trained at the Houston Ballet Academy since she was 7. And there's some interesting things about Lauren that kind of position her for the type of success that she had. She began when she was 7, which is the typical kind of younger age. She had 2 parents that were in the arts. Her father was the assistant principal at a performing arts high school in Houston, and her mother was a classical piano teacher. She was very interested in the violin. And she said that at the time she started ballet, she preferred the violin. But I asked her why she stuck with ballet. If you think about all of the hurdles it takes any person studying ballet, no matter the color of their skin, their body abilities, their anything, ballet is not the road of the easy profession. It takes years and years of training, right? So I asked her why she stuck with it, and she said she was gonna quit 3 times. And she told me stories about when she was 9, 11, and 13. And I want to share with you 2 of these stories as defining moments in Lauren Anderson's life. When Lauren Anderson was 9 years old, I'm gonna read from my notes here. She went to see the Dance Theater of Harlem. It was funny, number 1, she said, that she didn't know she was going to see the Dance Theater of Harlem. Number 2, she didn't know who they were, even if you'd told her. And then she saw an African-American ballerina run across the stage. And she was like, oh. And then she saw another, And then she tells the story that she sat on the edge of her seat. Her mom remembers it well and tells her often. She sat on the edge of her seat for the entire performance. It was kind of a turning point in her life. And when she saw them do Firebird, she said, I want to be her. And that was the time she was going to quit. But after seeing that performance, she didn't. And I'm going to plant a little seed and come back to it, that what she saw on stage was an in-group message. And I will come back to that very soon. When she was 13 years old, she realized that dance had probably already chosen her. She had a very competitive side. She realized that she had a superpower in jumping, and she could jump higher than almost anybody. And she was fearless with turns. She decided that she wanted to be a dancer. And she notes that at a certain age, your parents get involved and they start to say, like, what are you going to do with your life? What are you doing? What are you studying? And so her parents went and asked the director if she was any good and if this is something that she should pursue. They went in and asked Ben Stevenson, the director, and he was very honest. And he said, no, I would not think Lauren would be a good dancer, but she has a good singing voice and a good personality, and musical theater might be her niche. But she should keep taking ballet because it's a good base of all dance. And she'd have an edge if she went into musical theater as an auditionee with this ballet knowledge. Well, Lauren Anderson says that at this moment she was devastated, and she was ready to quit. And she left the room when Ben Stevenson was telling her parents about this. And her father came out and said, you're taking these classes because we've already paid for them, and we'll visit this again at the beginning of next year. She accounts the story. Meanwhile, the spring show was going, and every kid in the Houston Ballet is in the spring show. The spring show that year was Alice in Wonderland. I guess it was like January. We all ran to the board to see the casting, and next to Alice, it had the last name Anderson. I figured there was some other person with the same last name, Anderson. That couldn't be me. I couldn't be Alice. And I looked down and there were no more Andersons. So I went into the office, and again, I was devastated. I had just been told that I wasn't made for ballet, and now I'm not cast in this musical. And I said, why am I the only kid not in the show? And Ben Stevenson said to me, darling, you're Alice. And I was like, oh, I can't be Alice. Alice is white. And he said to me, the only color in art is on a canvas. You're the dancer. You're a dancer, and dancers dance. You are Alice. I couldn't believe it. That was like the thing. I really couldn't believe it. I didn't have to be the ballerina in Alice in Wonderland. I could be a tiger lily. I could be the lead. I could be anything. I could be Alice. The idea that I could be anything. And then I thought to myself, well, shoot, if I could be Alice in Wonderland, I could be anything. I take this moment from Lauren Anderson as an opportunity and a defining moment that kind of broke the ceiling for her, where she had seen a ceiling. She had told me that she expected, after she saw Dance Theater Parliament 9, that she would train with the Houston Academy until it was time to join a company, and then leave and go there where she could get a job. She didn't see herself getting a job with the Houston Ballet, but doors opened and opened and opened. And as it happens, the Houston Ballet became kind of a hub for people of the global majority. And there was a Latinx contingent, an Asian contingent, an African-American contingent, and a lot of people of color were in fact dancing with that company at the time that she was a company member. One more defining moment I want to share with you about Lauren Anderson, and it's more recent, within the last couple of years. I asked her about going to Dance Theater of Harlem, the building, the place, da 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 da, right? And she says that just a couple of years ago, Virginia Johnson called and asked her to teach during the summer program. Virginia Johnson, who was a ballerina that Lauren had looked up to as a young dancer, called and asked her to teach. And she said, sure. And I got there. Just walking in and seeing that giant picture of Mr. Mitchell, it was, tears came to my eyes, you know, and walking around and seeing all the little brown ballerinas in one place. I'd never seen it before. I'd never, ever witnessed that. So it choked me up. And when I think about it now, I still get a little choked up. The value of seeing people who look like you in the thing that you want to be doing is very affirming and offers an energy and spirit around resilience that can't be quantified by anything else. This is also kind of one of the reasons people will kind of point to around affinity groups that we could talk about in another time. All right. I want to share with you one last story about Lauren Anderson. I asked her what racism she might have experienced in ballet. And to be honest, she didn't have a ton of stories. She realized how Houston Ballet insulated her to a lot of racism. And she says, I did not, I have a typo there. I did not know it was a thing until we had guest choreographers working with the company. She didn't see the racism in ballet and in dance as anything until people came to work with her. And she says, she describes this experience as a company member. We were doing, I think it was my first year in the company, we were doing themes and variations. Someone came to a set and there were some people that were used to being in solos in another ballet, and they were in the next room. So they let the core ballet members slip into their spots, and all the core members and apprentices were being used and standing in to learn this piece being set by this guest choreographer. And then that guest choreographer leaned over and said, can we get someone from the academy? I can't put her in. Lauren says, now, I can do the corps de ballet of themes and variations. As a matter of fact, after they left, the guest choreographer left, the next time we did themes and variations, I was the lead every time. So it wasn't because I couldn't do the movement, that I couldn't execute the steps. It was because they weren't used to seeing brown people in absolutely classical ballet. I mean, just to think about what that's like to be in your home space, performing and dancing with your company and having them bring in students to take your spot. It's really a tragic, horrible experience. And I appreciate Lauren sharing the story with us so that we could really think about that and what that experience is like for people in predominantly white spaces where racism is operating. I want to now focus our attention on Caridad Martinez. Caridad Martinez was a dancer, a principal dancer with the National Ballet of Cuba. She's from Cuba. She danced with the company for around 20 years, a little bit over, I believe. She's now at the Ailey School and working a number of places in New York, teaching and working. And when I met her, she was the director of education at Ballet Hispanico. And she sat with me and shared many stories about her training at the National School of Ballet in Cuba, in Havana, and her experiences as a company member, and you know what it was like. And one of the things that she was also communicating to me that was important was how race was operating differently in her life than say here, because as I've mentioned before, and many of you know, race does operate differently in different countries, right? And so she talked about herself as an Afro-Cuban woman. And she talked about the cohesiveness of everybody being Cuban. And race is not as palpable there, but there are times and places where it was a thing. And there were times and places in different eras with the ballet company when she experienced more discrimination because of her kinky hair and wide nose. She's a lighter skinned Cuban, African, Afro-Cuban woman, but she's an Afro-Cuban woman, as she describes herself. I'm going to share with you a story. She talks about auditioning for the company at the age of 7, I believe, or 9. And now my notes are scattered a little bit. But she was a small child and she was coming in for a second audition. This story is very interesting to me because it really speaks to colorism and how it was operating in Caridad's life. And this is similar to what happened to Raven Wilkinson, who was touring with the Ballet Russe. So Caridad is with her mother, who's taken her to the second audition. She already passed the first. And the secretary at the dance school says to her mother, "Oh, I see your daughter. She's here for the audition." And her mother says yes. And Caridad describes her mother as a bell, and she has lots of energy, and she's smiling, and she's energetic, and she says, "Yes, this is my daughter," and she's already passed the first audition, and she's excited. And the woman says, "Yeah, but she's not going to get in because she's, they don't take Black children." And Caridad's mother turned around to the woman, turned Caridad to face her. They both faced her, and she said, "Yes, but she will be the first. She will be the first." And she was. She was the first Afro-Cuban woman to ascend in the company in the ways in which she did. She said that when she was with the company, there was less discrimination than at other times. So after she left, there was more. There were times in the history of the National Ballet Company where you could look at the publicity or the images that are presented publicly and see that it's a very white in terms of colorism. Those who could approximate whiteness were the ones who were given company roles and excelled in the school. And it was interesting. I did ask the woman that I interviewed in South Africa who had studied in the National Ballet of Cuba and was in the Joburg Ballet, Claudia, if she had experienced that colorism. And she didn't feel that it was a issue for her, but she did mention that a lot of the people who left the country to get company employment in other dance institutions were darker Cubans. And that's something that you can kind of see and follow, which also makes sense because in the South African dance company, they were bringing in people with a darker skin color for the purpose of making the company look more colorful and diverse, right? I want to skip now over to Yanette Fernandez, and she is dancing today and now with Dance Theater of Harlem. I believe she's in her 5th season there. And she was born and raised in Cuba, and she had a lot of similar stories to Caridad's when she talks about the training. She would say, like, we did 5 hours of schooling in the morning and then 5 hours in the evening. And then we got out of dance at 10 o'clock and the bus comes at 10:20 and you can't miss it. And a lot of the kind of trials and tribulations of commuting into the school and then making it into the company. She later made the decision to leave the company by going with friends that helped her get out of Cuba to Puerto Rico. And she stayed there for a little while before she came into the United States and trained worked actually in Miami for, I think, 6 months to a year before she came up to Harlem, New York area. And she trained for another year with Caridad Martinez to get the skill level up to audition for Dance Theater of Harlem and join the company. And she talked a little bit about the language barriers that she had to push against, but she was feeling very supported. And that brings me to my last point that I'm going to cover today. I'm going to bring forward an educational scholar named Mary Eric. And Mary Eric talks about in-group messaging. People get in-group messages that relate to our identity and our identity markers that are inscribed on our bodies. And those identity markers might be, I would get in-group messages from women, from Black women, from Black people, messages that tell you where you can go, what you should be doing, how you should do it. And a lot of times in group messaging can be things like you're in school and you're reading about all of the American presidents, right? Well, that might be an in-group message to white men that they belong in leadership, that they belong in national positions. That's an in-group message, right? 70 to 80% of teachers are white women. And so a lot of times young children see white women at the front of a classroom. That's an in-group message that teaching is a place where white women often find themselves in the role of, right? So what are the in-group messages around African Americans, Latinx people, Asian people in ballet? If you were a student of ballet, where might you look for messages? What kinds of messaging would you get? Would you get affirmation? Would you see yourself, at the top tiers of the companies? What are you striving for? Where are those messages? So I want to show you a little bit. We have our identity here in this diagram. And as I'm looking, your gender and your race can go into in-group messaging. So can sexual orientation. The identity markers that are most salient to you that you can identify in other people, and oftentimes might think to yourself something along the lines of, well, if they can do it, I can do it, right? That in-group messaging. And I want to suggest to you that there are really clear in-group messaging going on between some of these women of color in ballet. One of the things I asked Lauren Anderson about in her interview was her experience with Misty Copeland. And it's been widely covered and reported that Lauren Anderson and Raven Wilkinson were sitting together when Misty Copeland debuted as the principal ballerina in Swan Lake. And that experience that she had, they took notes, they shared with her after stage, after the show, in between the show, and they were very much a part of that experience. And throughout Misty's time coming up through the ranks and in her educational background training, she was receiving in-group messaging, signaling to her that there was somebody before, somebody had paved a way, and that she could do this too. I'm missing a slide. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the in-group messaging that was going on between Yanette Fernandez and Caridad Martinez, and that in-group messaging can be seen in a lot of these dancers' lives. Now, I don't have a lot to share with you about Asian women of the global majority, because as I mentioned before, I have not interviewed many for a number of reasons. I've requested several and been denied a number, but also there is a language barrier. And I have found that of the Asian and Latinx ballet dancers in some of the top tier companies that I was seeking out, oftentimes they're not born in the United States, which wasn't a disclaimer or reason why I didn't interview them. I was, traveling internationally to interview people. But it is an interesting dynamic to understand when you think about who is dancing and who is the American dancing body. Who are these dancers? And in terms of women of the global majority in the United States, ballet really does see a lot bigger presence with African-American ballet dancers, as small as their presence might sometimes feel in certain times and spaces. And I would attribute that to the institution of Dance Theater of Harlem for sure. But I want to share with you a little bit about Shelby Colonna, who dances with Ballet Hispanico. Oh, I'm exposing my typo, but this is a Houston native, and she attended the Houston High School for Performing Arts. She got the AILI certificate in 2013 and joined Ballet Hispanico in 2019. And I want to share with you one of her experiences that really speaks a little bit to the imposter syndrome, and also some of the ways in which people of the global majority feel at times in terms of coming into a space when they feel that tokenism is an implicit value, right? So I asked her about casting and if she ever felt typecast and what that experience was like. And she talked about her experiences around being cast as Clara in The Nutcracker. The director was like, this doesn't work. We need to find, it was like they never said exactly what the nuance of the problem was. So, oh, excuse me. They said, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit scattered here. The director was like, we don't need this to match up perfectly. This is totally fine. And I was like, oh, that's great. Because there was this one world where everybody could be together and it didn't matter. And then there was this other world outside of dance where everything wasn't always so accepting. It changed as I got a little bit older. I felt like, you know, when you're younger, things happen that way along the lines of either you're a good dancer or you're not. But when you're older, everyone's a good dancer. So it starts to become typecast, you know, not in the way that you're not good enough, but at the time I joined Ballet Hispanico, there was another Asian dancer in the company. And I think that if I looked more Asian, maybe I wouldn't be here. Sometimes I say that to myself, as if they could only have one of every one aesthetic within this other Latin focused dance company. And not because they don't want me or they feel like they're denying it, but just that they need to fulfill a certain kind of look or that there's typecasting. I say all this to say that oftentimes when people of the global majority are coming into a space where they are there are no other people like them, or there's only one, there is this thing that they carry with them in the back of their mind that, you know, they could only have one person of color, they can't have too many. And they're kind of calculating on how much space is here for me, you know, how much space is here for me. And that's one of those struggles. Finally, I wanted to just share a little bit about striving for the middle class. And I'm building off the scholarship of Brenda Dixon Gottschalk, Dr. Brenda Dixon Gottschalk. And she notes that besides being an art form pursued for pleasure or professional aims, ballet was a symbol of privilege, signaling a level of acculturation inaccessible to the masses. Attendance at dancing school in and of itself was a status indicator. And the person who studied point and went up on their toes often idealized above the ones who got down and tapped or stomped. And this is an excerpt from her book, Joan Myers Brown and the Audacious Hope of the Black Ballerina. A lot of research has been done on kind of the status symbol of ballet as an art form. And to be sure, oftentimes it's family, mothers oftentimes, but family members too, that will shuttle their little daughters into dance classes, right? And it is a certain symbol of financial status to be able to afford the classes, to take the time from household chores or duties or other responsibilities to come back and forth to the studio for training. And that actually, in my experience, is not something specific to people of the global majority, but it's all people who are striving for that middle class space, seeing that socially and culturally as that status symbol, and what that means for people with opportunity. So some of the women that I talked to really talked about this striving for something better and ballet being a vehicle to that, and others feeling very at home in their middle class status. And the ballet classes were just a part of that and an extension of that. So this was also a means of how this was expressed. And lastly, I leave you with this image of this young lady who is taking a ballet class, and she's got her hair up in a bun and she has beautiful braids in her hair. And my question is, does she get to dance? If she does get to dance, then what? And if she does not get to dance, then what? And it's a really important question to think about. Can she be accepted in a dance space as she is? Or does she have to shapeshift and alter parts of her body to approximate whiteness in order for entry? If we accept this little girl as she is in the world of ballet and all forms of dance, how does that expand space in terms of in-group messaging? My last little thought to leave you with, I shared stories of African-American ballet dancers 10 years ago at a small private liberal arts college in the Northeast. And there was a woman in the front row, and she thought I was absolutely crazy to think there was any issue with African-American ballet dancers. She was 20 years old, and she was like, I am from Houston, Texas, and I have seen a principal ballet dancer on the stage my whole life. I don't know what you're talking about when you say there's a scarcity of Black ballerinas. And I said, I bet you don't, because you've been looking up at Lauren Anderson your whole life, right? So if we change the paradigm in which young people witness and see ballet being lived and explored, we can change the next generation of ideas and possibilities for all of our dancers to see who they would be standing next to on stage and looking up to on stage, all of the ways and all of the things. I would invite your questions, thoughts, and reflections. Please share them in the chat and they'll be forwarded to me. And I also want to thank again the women that shared with me in this research, and also Dr. Scholich, who thought of me and bringing me in today. She's a great colleague in the field and the work that San Francisco Ballet does. Thank you all for joining me today. And I'll sit quietly for a moment and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much. Your research is so important right now, and we really appreciate you sharing it with us. I am going to read this one question that came in through YouTube. It says, my daughter experienced racism when she first started out, but didn't know what it was, even though what she felt was hurtful. There were no images in person or otherwise that made her feel comfortable. During her first year of national auditions, she was consistently the only African-American woman, and sometimes otherwise as well, among hundreds of auditioners. How do we fix this?
Wow, that is a big question. I'm really glad that your daughter is communicating with you about these issues and that you brought it up and that you're thinking about it. I can think about so many times where I experienced racism and discrimination and nobody said anything. And I just kind of was like, was it me? Was it me? Was it, what happened? And I was so confused because nobody said anything. Nobody witnessed for me. Nobody said, I saw what happened. It is so liberating and affirming when somebody says that was really a thing. It's not in your head. You really felt uncomfortable because it was uncomfortable. And so for people to be honest, when something like that's happening, a lot of times it's the elephant in the room and we don't want to talk about it. But it's so liberating when somebody acknowledges your pain, your hurt, that this is not fair, it's not right. And when we don't acknowledge moments like that, that contributes to racial trauma, right? And part of racial healing, this is a whole other 3 lectures, is people being able to witness and claim it and identify it. So continue doing what you are doing, supporting your daughter, and also show her images of women of the global majority doing ballet all over the world. Take her to see it when possible. But these experiences are quite painful, and you can let her know that she is not alone.
Thank you. There was also a follow-up question The same person said that they recalled when many students would ask her daughter why she auditioned for the top most difficult summer intensives.
I mean, there's lots of different questions. I mean, in ways you could answer that, but I would just say the same reason you did, because I want to learn from the best with the best, and I am the best. I mean, I would just be honest. Definitely, that is a microaggression. I might call that out and ask questions as to, why they're asking me that. But at the end of the day, everybody is at a different place on their journey in terms of being able to unpack and deal with these issues. And, it depends what rabbit hole you want to go down when you're in the midst of confronting these kinds of things with sometimes people who you have to work with and learn a combination to go across the floor in the audition. So I don't want to give you one answer because, it is nuanced in the room.
Thank you for that. We do just have time for one more question. It says, how do you feel your research can be used by San Francisco Ballet and other companies to address the way they stand as a role model for other ballet companies around the world?
I actually have been working with San Francisco Ballet here and there at a number of occasions over the last couple of years. And they are really interested and open in doing the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, anti-racist practices. But I would say ballet is a very calcified genre in history, and it is going to take a community effort. But it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And I do think that they are moving towards that process. Whatever this person who's asking the questions role is in the community, I think that they can, be a part of that process, because community members, dancers, everybody working together. The leadership and administration has to kind of lead, but that doesn't mean that the community doesn't also have a responsibility to move with the direction. And also push a little harder if it's not going fast enough.
Well, again, we thank you so much for sharing your research with us. We're very proud to have you as our visiting scholar this year. And I want everyone to know that these are recorded so that you can avail yourself to this talk and others going forward. So thank you for joining us. On behalf of San Francisco Ballet, we wish you and your family good health. Thank you.